The Book of Order tells us that the session shall have responsibility for governing the congregation and guiding its witness to the servant activity of God in the world, so that the congregation is and becomes a community of faith, hope, love, and witness. In order to do this, the Book of Order and the Book of Confessions reminds us of the historic notes of the church. It says in F 1.0303,
"Where Christ is, there is the true church. Since the earliest days of the Reformation, Reformed Christians have marked the presence of the true church wherever. The Word of God is truly preached and heard, the sacraments are rightly administered, and ecclesiastical discipline is uprightly ministered. It's the session's responsibility to provide a place that the Word of God may be truly preached and heard. This might mean in person or online, indoors or outdoors, or wherever the church can gather for regular worship, for education, and for fellowship and spiritual nurture."
The session provides for regular preaching by a minister or some other trained person. Especially in the absence of a pastor, it's an important job to look for somebody who can provide regular preaching of the Word for the congregation. The presbytery can help. The presbytery office or committee on ministry maintains a list of approved and available pastors who can supply the pulpit once or on an ongoing basis. Check the presbytery website for the list and directory.
The session authorizes all celebrations of sacraments. The PCUSA recognizes 2 sacraments given as commandments by Christ to do this. The Lord's Supper or communion needs to be celebrated at least quarterly during public worship. Baptisms are authorized by the session as requested by parents or by individuals. An elder approved by session presents an infant or an adult for baptism on behalf of the session and before the whole church in a service of worship. As Presbyterians and members of the Reformed tradition, we don't present ourselves for baptism. Baptism is an act of the whole community of faith, with vows taken by or on behalf of the baptized, as well as by the whole congregation.
The session leads the congregation in outreach into the community through mission and evangelism. The session initiates ministries of social healing and reconciliation in the community. The session leads the way for the church to engage in ministries of peace and justice, locally and worldwide. The session initiates and responds to ecumenical initiatives with other churches and other faiths. We are connectional with other Presbyterians, other Christians, and even other faith communities.
Being a session involves receiving and dismissing members of the congregation. The session reviews the role of active members annually. The session looks to see who's actively engaged in the life of the church. Are there people who have fallen away from active participation? Has anyone been forgotten? The session is responsible for finding the lost sheep and shepherding them back into the flock. When was the last time your session reviewed the role of active members? Are there people right now you can think of who have fallen away from being active in the life of the church? What will you do to bring them back?
The session has a responsibility to train and examine new elders and deacons. The session promotes active stewardship of financial gifts as well as gifts of the Spirit. The session also manages the physical property of the congregation for the furtherance of its mission. It's important to remember that our church property is held in trust for the Presbyterian.
The session directs and oversees the ministry of deacons, trustees, and all other organizations of the congregation. It's the session's job to know what's happening in the nursery, in the Presbyterian women, in the Stephen ministry, and all other ministries of the church. When ministries are undertaken in the church, they need to be approved and overseen by the session. The session needs to ensure that all ministries undertaken by the name of a congregation are consistent with the session's understanding of their theology and the mission of the church.
The session is called to lead the congregation in connecting to the mission of the whole church. One of the best ways to do this is to appoint a person to regularly keep up with the PCUSA's main websites, www.pcusa.org and www.presbyterianmission.org.
The session has a role in warning and bearing witness against error and immorality. What does that mean? For many congregations, it means paying attention to the currents in the community, to social issues, to the needs of all the church's spiritual and geographical neighbors. Does the church need to exercise the voice of conscience? Is there prophetic word to be spoken? Are there actions to be engaged?
The session elects commissioners to presbytery, elects the church treasurer, and votes to set the church's annual budget. The session oversees the financial work of the church and provides full, accurate, regular reports to the congregation about how money is being spent, giving people confidence that their financial gifts are being used wisely and appropriately.
And then, of course, there are indeed checklists and practical items from the Book of Order that need to be tended. But even these are important, not because somebody's looking over your shoulder to get you if you don't get them right, but because these are measures of spiritual fidelity to the connections of the church. Getting these right means we're all headed the same way together. The clerk of session is elected by the session. A clerk is a ruling elder. The clerk doesn't have to be currently serving as a member of session. It's up to the session to decide how long a clerk will serve. It's the clerk's job to see that the session properly documents its meetings, policies, and ministries. The clerk isn't the only member of the session responsible for this, but a good clerk reminds and delegates this work. The clerk serves as the chief friend to the ministries of pastors, sessions, and congregations, seeing that things are done decently and in order.
Among session responsibilities that normally concern the clerk of session are roles and manuals. There are 3 rows of membership that the session has to maintain and safely store in a publicly accessible place, normally the church office. There's a roll of active members, a roll of baptized members, and a roll of affiliate members. Bylaws. Does the church have bylaws? Does anybody know where they are? Has anyone seen them lately?
Where is the church's administrative manual? When was it last updated? Does it exist in space and time? Every church is required not only to have an administrative manual of operations, but also have a sexual misconduct prevention policy that's approved and enacted by the session. Have all teachers and leaders of children and youth had a background check? Has your pastor completed the presbytery's sexual misconduct prevention training? Does the church review its insurance on a regular basis? Has the church had a full financial review, not necessarily an audit, but a review in the past year? Are the session meeting minutes typed and kept in a secure folder in the church office where anyone who wants to see them can find them? Are the minutes accurate? Have the church's minutes been reviewed by presbytery at least once every 2 years?
Are there backups of the minutes kept in a separate, shared, accessible location? If minutes are uploaded to the cloud, who has the username and password? Who has read-write access? Have older minutes been sent to the Presbyterian Historical Society for archiving? These matters might not sound spiritual, but they're practical evidence of your church's fidelity and faithfulness to God, to itself, and to the higher councils of the PCUSA.